Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS and prop preview for this week's Sentry Tournament of Champions. It feels good to have some PGA DFS back and get to make sure you're ready for all of your exposure this week with a look at the weather report, some DFS ownership, all of your questions when it comes to your lineups this weekend, as well as a look at the prop side of things and a little idea of what I'm doing over there on Underdog and Prize Picks. But all your questions, feel free to go ahead and throw them down in chat. Also, say hi down to the live chat. It's been a while since we've all gone together. I can see we got Karoom down there, who first off, thank you for the kind words, man. I appreciate it. And I'm hyped to get back after golf as well. We've also got Steven down there as well. Welcome on in. Long time no see. And he says we're back. And that is the most beautiful words that I could hear right now. So let's not waste any time at all. Go ahead and get this thing rocking. So let's go ahead and start it off with a look at this event. And just to remind you guys, we've got ourselves a birdie fest this week. Maybe you haven't watched any content. Maybe you forgot about the event last year, but Chris Kirk won this thing at 29 under par. And there have actually been a few years we've gone past 30 under par winning this thing. And while the weather for Thursday does look like it's going to be a little bit blustery, maybe not the lowest scores out there round one, the calm conditions expected for rounds 2 through 4 are going to lead to some of the better scoring that we see the entire year. So I believe second place was like 27, 28 under par. Pretty much to crack the top 10, you've got to shoot like 23, 24 under. So it's a very low scoring event. You want guys that have birdie or better upside. And usually at these birdie fest contests, you see a lot of your putters up there towards the top. And what I'll show you over here on the right side of this chart is that your top 5 scorers, almost all of them had really good putting weeks. The only one that was the exception to that rule was Scotty Scheffler, who is just otherworldly when it comes to the ball striking category. So a course that we've seen for quite some time, we kind of have a good idea of what to expect from it. Of course, guys, this website is our presenting sponsor of a lot of our content this year, and that is Bet the Number. If you use code Gsluke, it will give you a discount off any membership over there. And outside of just looking at the results from last year, this is going to be a key fixture of even just this live stream today. So we'll be peeking back at Bet the Number to get an idea of some of the modeling here in a few minutes, but also the prop stuff later on. They've added a lot of functionality when it comes to the props, which I'm super stoked about here in 2025. So I'll be working with the Bet the Number team a little bit closer this year as well, getting some inside information from them on the ways that they're breaking down golf courses that are different than other people in the industry. So I'm super stoked for that partnership to be able to give you guys even deeper insights than what we've been doing here on the channel before, and all the different tools that they're developing. Before we go into DFS, before we bring up the ownership and really talk through all of that jazz, any questions that you guys have for your lineups, we've got to look at the weather, right? One of the most important aspects when it comes to playing PGA DFS is making sure that we have an accurate weather report to work with. Now, on a week like this, that's only a 60-player field, and with them going off of holes 1 in 10, there's not going to be a huge spread of tee times. If this were a 156-player field, we'd be especially worried about what the weather forecast was. But because it is a 60-player field, we have those condensed tee times, we're probably not going to see a massive edge over Thursday and Friday, but it is important to know what kind of conditions that these guys are going to be playing in. Even if it's not a tee time edge that we're going after the first few days, if it's going to play harder, we want to ramp up around the green in our modeling. We want to scale back some of our scoring stats like birdie or better percentage. And when we look at Thursday, that's exactly why I wanted to bring this up, because what you'll see with the top 2 models tomorrow is you've got 17 to 20 miles an hour, and these are your sustained winds. These are not the wind gusts that they have here on this 5 model screen. If we were to click on these models individually, you'll see that these are the sustained winds, and the wind gusts are close to 30 miles an hour in those top 2 models. Now, you do have the icon, which is a little bit calmer, closer to like 10 miles an hour of sustained winds. Even this Medio Blue model is closer to 12 miles an hour sustained, but 3 out of the 4, this bottom one, the NAM, tends to agree with the top 2, that it's going to be pretty nasty conditions out there for the first day. Now, if we look at Friday, it looks 9-day difference. Every single model over there for Friday is calling for much calmer conditions than what we're getting for Thursday. So on Friday, you're going to see that -4 to -6 scoring average that we usually see around this course. But tomorrow, it wouldn't surprise me at all if the scoring average was as worse as maybe 2.5 strokes under. I think probably more realistically, closer to -3 or -3.5 scoring average average. But if they set it up with tough pin locations, which we haven't gotten yet, so that's why I can't give you guys the insight there. But if it is going to be a tough setup in terms of your pin locations, I could see it only being like a -2.5 scoring average, which on a par 73 setup is actually kind of tough. I know it doesn't sound tough when they're playing nearly 3 strokes under par, but when you had a -6.5 scoring average around this course on Sunday last year, you can see why I would be saying that. So the weather, by the way, with tee times, because there's only that 2.5, about 3-hour spread, there's not going to be any sort of edge to really go out there and generate. I think weather is going to be a lot more important when we're talking about Showdown later this week, which, by the way, just to give you guys the PSA on the Showdown streams, those are going to be on the Ship It Nation YouTube channel. So you guys will see an announcement about that over there on my X/Twitter, but make sure you guys are subscribed over there on the Ship It Nation YouTube channel so you guys can get all those streams out there for rounds 2 and 4. Just a PSA on that as well. The prop end of that, so the second half of those live streams, is going to be back on my channel afterwards. So more on that later. We'll talk about the content schedule. But yeah, the weather aspect, I think it's more important over there for the Showdown side, just because for a single day, when maybe we can find a 2-hour window of tee times, they're going to play easier than the rest. We can probably attack it for a single day. But when we have this, two tee set up, right, one of the holes 1 in 10 and the 60-player field, I just think you might be doing a little bit too much if you go out there and play a weather edge. Let me go over there and bring up our DFS projections. Now we'll go through some of the ownership trends, and now is the perfect time for you guys to hit me with any questions. So the kind of questions that I'm looking for down in chat are any specific player questions. Now, I think course fit questions are my favorite there, but if we're talking about specific lineup-based questions, don't give me like your lineup of 6 players, right? Let's keep them to 2-on-2s, maybe 1-on-1s that we're considering out there in our builds. That sort of question, right? Obviously, if you like a player, you want my thoughts on them, that sort of thing. And the main thing I'm going to be talking about here as we go tier by tier, guys, is the ownership trends. And there's a real reason for that. It's Wednesday. We've seen content all week. A lot of you guys are dedicated PGA DFS players, and you have a pretty good idea of who you're going to play at this point. Now that we're on to Wednesday, you figured out your player pool, most of you at least, by this point of the week. It's not about who you're playing right now. I feel like a lot of people focus on that on Wednesdays for some reason. It's how you're using them in lineups. It's knowing, hey, which players in my player pool are going to be especially chalky? What guys can I use to get a little bit different to the rest of the field? That's what we're going to focus on right here. So for this live stream, this is not always going to be the case, though, guys. If you've been following my content, you guys will know this. I usually have to keep some of these projections behind the paywall, but for the sake of this being the first live stream of the year, Happy New Year, everyone. Of course, holiday here on the first of the year. I'm going to have all the ownership on here. So, by the way, if you just want to see ownership, obviously you're not going to have to ask me for any specific players, but that's what we're going to focus on for our discussion, because at this stage of the week, you should kind of know who you're playing. The more important aspect is making sure that you're building lineups that have enough leverage, that aren't going to be duplicated, and that are executed to try and take down the contest that you're entering. So let's start up there at the top. Xander Schauffele is a core play for me. If you guys saw my breakdown, you guys know that I love him this week. And you also know that I thought he was going to be about 25 to 35% owned. So at about 30.8%, that is exactly where I was expecting him to come in. So I'm not worried about the ownership. As you heard during my preview there on Monday, he's the kind of player that you know is going to catch some steam, but as the best player in the field, and I don't think it's particularly close in this sort of field, especially without Scotty Scheffler playing, he's the kind of guy that I'll get over the field on, even at a 30% ownership number. And it's not like he's drastically higher owned than everyone else around him. You've still got Morikawa at 23.5% owned himself. I think it's some single entries. He's probably going to get closer to the 30% that you have with Xander, mostly because of his course history. People are going to love all these top 7 finishes, but Xander up there at about 30% is the kind of guy that you can use at that kind of ownership number. But as I was just saying, it's how you go ahead and deploy these players. If you're going to use a 30% owned player up top, it is going to force your hand a little bit when it comes to your ownership further down the line. In terms of your other like 9, 10K players, you've got Morikawa at about 23.5, as I was talking about before. But outside of that, you've got Cantlay Aubert at about 17.5% ownership. Justin Thomas catching some steam as well Considering his form, considering he nearly won his last start out, I think that makes a lot of sense that he'd be closer to about 25%. It doesn't make guys like Justin Thomas or Xander Schauffele unplayable because they're your highest owned players towards the top. It's just that if you're going to use them, it is going to have consequences on the rest of your lineup. Hideki's about 15.5%. I got Sanjay at about 22% ownership. So of these 9K players, and I'll keep it the top end of the 9K range and this 10K range that I'm grouping together here, you're going to have ownership on pretty much everyone. And that's the case with all these PGA DFS slates. PGA DFS isn't like NFL DFS where people are very comfortable leaving salary on the table. People almost always spend all of their salary in PGA DFS. If they're not spending all their salary, they're spending like $49,700 at the very least, right? So leaving like $300 on the table at the very most. So what that means is that these guys towards the top, especially with a slate that has pricing this soft, I mean, last year's champion is $7,000 for goodness sakes. You've got guys like Echevarria that I love this week. In fact, he's my third ranked player in the field, and he's down there at $6,500 because you have so many guys in that 6 and 7K range that are playable. That's going to give even more ownership to these guys here at the top. So even your quote unquote pivots, this is why I don't think Xander's the worst ownership. They're at 30%. Your lowest owned guy is Hideki here at 15.5%. Hovland, if we go to the bottom end of the 9K range, he's there at 11.4%. But now we're starting to get down to the bottom end of the 9K range and 8K range, which is a completely different play than those guys at the very top end of the board. So if your lowest owned player is going to be like Hideki, your Aubert, maybe your Cantlays at like 15 to 17.5%, and your mega chalk, right, is Xander at 30%, I would argue that that is not a big enough gap between your lowest and your highest owned players. So if that's going to be the case, hopefully these ownership projections are pretty close to spot on out there tomorrow, because if that's the case, I'm going to be thrilled about playing Xander at about 30%. Let's catch up on chat. Let me get a sip of my Red Bull here. And by the way, guys, if you have any questions, hit me up with those in chat, and let's catch up on this. What's going on? Michael says, cheers to a new year. Cheers to that. We are back on golf. Let's go. Absolutely. Cheers to that. Thank you, Antonio, for the New Year's wishes. Welcome on in as well. Is Finau going to be overlooked on a course like this? So let's look at the ownership, and I'll let you know, Steven. So the ownership's at about 15.7%. I think that it would be fair to call that about average ownership in this range. If you take a look at the guys around him, like Hovland's 11.4%, that's probably someone I would consider overlooked. The main reasoning for that, of course, with Victor Hovland, guys, is that he's dealing with that broken toe. So there's a little bit of injury concern out there with Hovland. Finau at like 15.7%. I'm not sure I'd call him overlooked, but he is averagely owned. It's a fair price at $9,100. He's certainly not over-owned. I would say that, though. So I'm not sure I'd call him overlooked, but he's definitely not chalky. Is there any edge to playing the first week? Is there more people that didn't play that know what they're doing? So I don't have the stats on that, Kevin, so it's hard to say anything definitively on the demographic of players that are playing the first week back. I would say because NFL is going on, that there's still probably a lot of sharps playing the first week back. Not everyone's heard about golf. It's not a full field event. They haven't done their full promotional stuff yet and pushing all their PGA DFS stuff. So I don't think so. I don't think there's a massive edge to playing the first week. I don't think there's a massive edge to playing really any week when it comes to playing PGA DFS. I think it's all just about the same. The majors, maybe there's a little bit of extra juice to squeeze just because you do have more casuals that are playing during the major championships. But yeah, outside of those 4 weeks, probably not. And yeah, this week's probably no different. Do I remove the cheaper players from my pool if they're too chalky? And if not, how do I like to play them? So, and you're referring to guys like a Dunlap, Cole, etc. on a week like this. So yeah, down low, I'm not a huge fan of playing a lot of chalk. So I know we just had the discussion of guys like Xander, a JT towards the top that I actually don't think are chalky enough. Towards the bottom, though, my tune changes rather quickly. Up top, you've got like the world's best players. You've got guys that are chalky for a reason. Xander, for example, he's your betting favorite this week. JT is your second betting favorite. So despite being like, number 5 in the pricing, he's your number 2 on a lot of those betting boards. Like, it makes sense that those guys are getting ownership. The guys you're talking about down low, and just to show you guys some of the ownership numbers, I've got Eric Cole at like 11.5%. Echevarria is getting some ownership too. Unless I absolutely love somebody and they're going to be like 10 to 15% owned down low, I'm probably not playing them. Now, that added caveat is there are a few guys down low that are 9 to 10% owned that I'm playing, like an Echeverria that you guys can see here as a value play, but it doesn't mean that you have to avoid them. Now, should you second guess pretty much all those guys that are chalky down low? Absolutely. And I think that's the easiest way to do it. Up top, you play your guys. I think ownership up top is a little bit overrated, but towards that middle to bottom end of the board, I think people don't play ownership enough when it comes to those kind of players. So yeah, very sharp question. And I agree with what you said. That's essentially what I do, Karoom. I do avoid a lot of those players, but not every single one. There's definitely a few that I'll get to. Happy New Year. And was Finau injured? He was at some point. That's why he was withdrawing from events. So yeah, he's got that going on as well. Actually, not something that I thought about that much this week, but yeah, he was injured. That's why he withdrew from the Grant Thornton Invitational a few weeks ago. Ready for the new year? Anything stick out between you and Vegas as a last man in? So yeah, I like these questions where it's like choosing between two guys. You're leaning Vegas, but you somebody that you always get wrong. So I would lean Vegas as well. Kevin Yu, though, let's just look at the ownership. The ownership should be lower on Kevin Yu. So if we go down here to Johnny Vegas, Vegas is here at $6,400. I've got him at 5.5%. Now, Kevin Yu is only 1% lower. So it's a very slight difference in that ownership. I would argue that they're pretty much the same player, though. They're both high birdie percentage players. They're both really long off the tee there with the Vegas and the Kevin Yu, which is helpful in a course like this. I would lean towards Kevin Yu just because he is a little bit lower owned, but really that's pretty close to a coin flip for me. They're both similar sort of players. If you have the $6,400, I don't know if you've already played Matt McCarty. My favorite from 6,400 and below, and I know it's not the question you asked, so disregard this, right? If it's not what you're wanting to hear, but McCarty's who I would take in terms of that player down low. And the main reasoning for that is I think McCarty's just really, really good. Like top 15, top 20 player in the world, sort of good. So $6,400, that's who I'd go with. But yeah, Vegas Yu, I get the upside there. They fit this style golf course quite well. Where'd we leave off? And what's going on? Anthony Stewart says, Happy New Year. Golf is back. Just beautiful words to hear. I love it. And welcome on in, dude. Let's go through a few other ownership trends here in this bottom end of the 9K range now. So we touched on the top end of the board, gave you guys my thoughts there. Towards the bottom end of the 9K range and 8K range is where the ownership starts to get a little bit more interesting. While up top, I try not to overthink some of the ownership there. In this range is where it starts to come into play. So Finau's there at 15.7%, Sanjay at 22%. I guess that's noteworthy as he's the only player that's over 20%. Asahit's 17.5%, but you'll see it's spread out for the most part. Your lowest owned players in this range would be like a Benny Ann, McIntyre, who are about 12% owned. Your highest owned player, I guess if we exclude Sanjay because he was $9,500, your highest owned player here is 17.5% owned Sam Burns. So just like the top end of the board, there's not a massive difference in the ownership, but ownership matters in this range because if you're taking, let's say, a 20% owned player or even like a 17% owned Sahith and pairing them up there with the Xander Schauffele, now you're getting into the range where you have no leverage towards the top end of the board. And let's say just for the sake of really hammering this home, you went Xander, Justin Thomas, and then your third man in was maybe a Sam Burns. It'd be expensive to fit those three in, but just for the sake of talking about the ownership here, let's assume that you're taking those three players together. Your last three players, because you've taken three guys that are pretty much 20% plus. I know Burns, he's close to 20%, but we're going to call him 20% for the sake of this exercise. Your last three players have to be all of your leverage if you're going with that kind of lineup. So that's why I say this 8K range really starts to matter when it comes to the ownership, because unless you're forcing in a lower owned guy up top, which is pretty much Hideki or Cantley and Obear, you really don't have that many guys to choose from. You've got to be a little bit careful about who you're playing down here. So that's why I like some of the guys that are higher owned, like Sanjay at 22%. He's just playing beautiful golf. He's been playing amazing golf for 3-4 months at this point. I'm going to be playing him early and often here in 2025. I like playing him, but if I'm starting with a chalky core up there with two guys up top, you know, that's why I'm mixing in Wyndham Clark, for example, who's closer to 14% owned. It's not a massive difference with that ownership. But just like I said before, it's not about individual plays. It's not about individual ownership numbers that you're including in your lineup. It's how you're playing them together. And even when you're making your player pool, you need to be thinking about these sort of things when you're going out there and trying to find combinations of 2-3 players to go out there and build around. Some people would call those a core. I do that sometimes. Some people call that core cascading, where you have cores of like 3, sometimes 4 players that you're building around. It's good to think that way because it gets you thinking about combinational ownership and not just individual pieces that you're playing. Because at the end of the day, you're not playing individual golfers out there in your contest. You're playing whole sets of 6 players out there in your contest. And by the way, Wyndham Clark, if you didn't see my breakdown earlier this week, I love him because of his upside, birdie or better horsepower at this sort of golf course. And he didn't play his best there towards the end of the season. That's why the form looks horrendous, but that's from like 4 months ago. So I don't think you have to worry about it all that much. Down here in the 7K range is where we really start to see polarization with the ownership. So it starts to happen in the 8K range. It starts to spread out just a little bit more than what we had there up top. But when we get down to sub $8,000 is where you really start to see the separation. So down here, you've got guys like Pendrith that are 13%, Davis Thompson are the 13%. And then you're starting to get the guys that are down the single digit range. You've got your Keegan Bradleys at 7.6%. You've got Jake Knapp, who's, I believe, the lowest owned player that we have here in the 7K range, who's only 4.9% owned. So though up top, there's not a lot of spots to get a bunch of leverage to the field. If you're playing in the large field GPPs, just like I said before, that you're going to have a lot of salary, a lot of ways to save salary on a week like this, you're going to have a lot of options down low to get the leverage that you're hoping for in contest as well. And if you leave salary on the table, if you force yourself to maybe take an extra player down here in the 6 and 7K range, that could be another way to get off of somebody that's like 15 to 20% owned and get somebody that's closer to like 7 to 10% as your last man in, which, that might be leaving $700 to $1,000 left on the table, which normally I would not advise, just because PGA DFS and their pricing is one of the more efficient sports when it comes to it. But at a no-cut event like this, and you've got to force in ways to get different to the field, I don't hate that as a way to make sure you're not duplicating with a bunch of other lineups. So something to think about when it comes to the ownership, and you can see that down here. Some of your more chalky players are being Eric Cole at like 11.5%. You've got over 9% on guys like a McCarthy, a Harry Hall, Echeverria, as we mentioned before, also pretty popular. But look at all these guys that are sub 5%. I mean, everyone from Kevin U below is sub 5% owned. You've got guys like Cam Davis, who are legit players. And Matt McCarty, who I talked about before, is only 6.5% owned. So while up top, we deal with issues and finding some leverage, that is not the case with the rest of the player pool. So I actually like this kind of field when it's closer to like 30 to 40 players, where I think we start to get into some trouble when it comes to finding leverage in GPPs. But when we have 60 players like this, it's kind of like having a cut. After Saturday and Sunday, it's just enough players to give us some opportunity for that leverage. So let's see if there's any questions that you guys want me to touch on. If not, I'll point out a few guys that I'll be using in some lineups. Where are we at? People might be playing above their bankroll early on, so it might be a little bit more advantageous. Oh, yeah, I could see that. I could see that being something that people are doing, a little bit more excited here at the beginning of the year. You said you've been one of the guys that's played too high early on. Yeah, you've got to be. Yeah, and you said you saw the season preview with DGen and special guests. By the way, it was a pleasure to be on that with some other people, some great minds there. It was a lot of fun. And that's a huge part of DFS too, right? Is bankroll management, knowing when to play and how much to play. It's an art form. Some people treat it differently. I think for most people out there, you should be setting your schedule every week and playing the same every single week, especially if you're doing it more as a hobby, right? If you're doing this just to get a sweat over the weekend, that sort of thing, which is a majority of people out there, by the way. No shame in doing so whatsoever. That's majority of DFS players. If that's you, you should probably play about the same amount every single week. That's usually the best way to do it, the most sustainable way. There's pros like me that it gets a little bit wonky, right? You see an edge, you maybe ramp up your bankroll a little bit more, but unless you're one of those people, yeah, probably play the same amount every single week. All right, let's go through a few players I wanted to point out. So I know we had our preview earlier this week. You guys know I like Echeverria. You guys know I like Fitzpatrick and Grazerman. But a few other players down low that have maybe caught my eye as the week has gone on is first off, Keegan Bradley. Keegan Bradley's been playing really solid golf lately. And what I like about Keegan is I like playing him on Bermuda grass golf courses. Over the last 2-3 years, some of his best performances have all come on Bermuda grass. Makes sense he's from South Florida. He putts on this surface all the time. So he at least has that narrative going for him as well. But it's also the year of the Ryder Cup. And this guy is all sorts of jacked up, right? Ever since getting that promotion, being told that he was going to be the Ryder Cup captain, this guy has been playing like vintage Keegan Bradley. And he's $7,500. He's pretty much not getting any ownership as well. He's there at 7.6% owned. I think that he's a sneaky son of a bitch this week that could go off, have himself a tournament. And I think part of it's the fact that he's on these Bermuda grass greens. I always like playing him when we get on this Bermuda grass. And partially the ownership. I thought he'd get maybe a little bit more steam than what he's getting. So yeah, Keegan Bradley. I'll definitely playing him in a few lineups this week. Who else can I point out? Billy Ho. Okay, so Billy Ho, I thought was also going to get some steam out there this week. But as the week went on, his ownership went from about 10, 11% down to the single-digit range. And in fact, now at about 8%, he's the average, if not slightly below the average ownership, down here at the bottom end of the sevens. Billy Ho tears up Bermuda grass golf courses. You can see over here to the right, he gains about a half a stroke putting per round over there on Bermuda grass. And this guy, Billy Ho, he plays really well in strong field events. You've seen him win the match play before. You've seen him win WGCs before. And a lot of those events, by the way, on Bermuda grass, the same surface that we're on this week. Billy Ho, I know the recent form, quote unquote, recent form for him, which hasn't even been all that recent because of when he's been playing, doesn't look all that good. But another potential GPP flyer that I think has some upside at a golf tournament like this. And then we'll go one more towards the bottom end of the board. I mentioned this on the preview, actually, but I'll make it official now. Adam Hadwin at $6,200. And I do want to point this one out, get this one official on paper. Adam Hadwin could pop off at this sort of golf course. He likes Bermuda. You can see over there, he gains about a quarter of a stroke per round. That's about 0.4 strokes better than his 24-round baseline when it comes to his putting. And you usually play Adam Hadwin at Birdie Fest. You play him at courses where he can make a lot of putts. He's a streaky putter. He's not the longest player off the tee, which at a 7,600-yard golf course, you may say would be a problem. But we've had winners at this event that have been some of the shortest players on the PGA Tour. Steve Stricker, Zach Johnson has won at this event before. Chris Kirk winning last year. Maybe not one of the shortest guys that we have on the PGA Tour, but when you have guys like Kirk, Stricker, Zach Johnson that can win around Kapalua, I'm not worried about a guy's driving distance this week. It's much more about their total driving. And he's not the best driver of the golf ball, but he's a damn good iron player, and he's a really good putter on these Bermuda grass greens. So he's only 3.5% owned out there in GBP. So I know I'm taking some chalk towards the top. I think that's warranted on a slate like this, but I've got quite a few diamonds in the rough that I'm taking towards the bottom. All right, let's go over to the lineup construction segment. So we're going to bring up Draftkings. We're going to build a few lineups together and give you guys an idea of the thought process when clicking names into lineups, which is the most important aspect of this live stream. As I mentioned, a lot of you guys kind of know who you're playing this week. It's much more about actually putting them together than who you're using at this stage. So let's go through that. So this is going to be for the large field GPP. This lineup, this thought process would be like I'm entering the big $5 or the big $20 that we have for this week. And in those kind of contests, you're trying to beat 20 to 50,000 other entries. So you don't just need to go out there and hit the nuts. You need to make sure you're not duplicating with 5 to 10 other lineups. And you've also got to make sure that when you hit the nuts, that you're not playing against half the field. You're not playing against a lineup with 25% plus ownership across all 6 spots. And I think when you have an event like this where we know where the leverage is, just like we said, going through that ownership there, it's almost all towards the bottom end of the board. It's usually a good place to start with those sort of players. So what I'm going to do for this, and we're going to build backwards to what most people would do for this kind of slate. We're going to take our low-owned guys, which for the most part are going to be cheaper players early in our lineup, and then we're going to round it off with our key pieces towards the top late. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to throw in we're going to throw Hadwin in here at 6,200. Then we're going to go into the 7K range, and we're going to throw in a Billy Horschel as well. So we're going to take 2 of those players that I just mentioned, both sub 10% owned, and that's going to give us a bulk of our leverage right there. Now, depending on who we take for our last 4 spots, we might have to try and take one other player that is at least average to below average ownership, but that'll depend on who we pair up with these 2 players. That puts us at about 9,000 remaining for an average. So we could definitely fit in a Schauffele if we wanted to. We could throw in an Aubert. We could throw in a Cantlay if we wanted to at $9,900. The added benefit of taking Cantlay is that he's a little bit lower owned than some of the other guys up top, him and Aubert at about 17.5%. So I wouldn't call him a leverage play, but by taking him rather than Justin Thomas, he's like 22 to 25% owned. It means that we don't have to take some super low owned guy with one of our last two spots. So that puts us at 78.5 remaining for our last two spots. We're going to go ahead and throw in a Grazerman, one of my value plays for this week. Wouldn't call him low owned, but at the same time, he's not mega chalk because he's $8,000. And then for your last man in here, depending on the GPP that you're entering, if you're in one of the ones that are like 25 to 50,000 entries, you might want to consider leaving some salary on the table. So if I was entering the big 20 or the big $5, I'm probably rounding off this kind of lineup with the Keegan Bradley. Not only am I taking slightly lower ownership, somebody that's just under 10%, but I'm also leaving $200 on the table, which isn't a ton. I mean, it's only $200 that you're leaving, but any salary that you're leaving is going to give you an extra chance to not be duplicated. And it lets us get onto a player that, first off, I like this week. And second off, that gives us that leverage that is all that much more helpful out there in those large field GPPs. Now, if it's just if this was like a bigger dollar contest, like maybe it was like a 50 to 500 entry contest that you're entering, something that's more of like a single entry rather than one of those big GPP contests. If you're entering a single entry, maybe you could take Cam Young as your last man in. Maybe you could take a Poston who's a little bit more popular and only leaving $100 on the table and then in that kind of build. But in the large field GPPs, especially when there's only 60 players to choose from, it's not quite the 24 player field that we had for the Hero or the 30 player field that we have out there for the Tour Championship. But you still have to think about it a little bit more than a full 156 player field. So make sure you're catering your lineups out there to different contests that you're entering. You're entering a large field GPP, force in a little bit of extra differentiation, force in a little bit of salary left on the table. You're entering a cash contest or a smaller field GPP, then maybe you don't have to worry about it nearly as much. So hopefully it gives you guys a good idea of how to do some of your lineup construction. I'll see if there's any last second DFS questions. If there's not, we're going to go over to the prop side of things, give you guys an idea of what I'm doing over there for round one on Underdog and Prize Picks. If you're just here for DFS though, appreciate you guys stopping by, tuning in for all the content here on Wednesday. Best of luck with the first event of the year, all of your exposure this week. And I still will go over any questions that you guys have down in chat. So if you still have anything, feel free to go ahead and fire on it right now. Let's see where we left off. Looks like we're good on the questions. So I am going to go over to the prop side of things now, but any DFS stuff, you guys just let me know. And if you're just here for DFS, salute to you guys. Best of luck this week and let's get it. So over on the prop side of things, we've got, I think, an interesting slate because the weather, as we talked about earlier, just joining us, I will remind you guys, it looks pretty dicey on some of these models. This GFS model is calling for about 20 miles an hour sustained, ECM close to 17 miles an hour, and this NEM model down here towards the bottom is also at about 17 miles an hour. And just to give you guys some of the details here, on the ECM, they've got it about 30 mile an hour wind gusts. This GFS model is a little bit calmer. It's closer to like 20 mile an hour wind gusts that you have over there for tomorrow. And ECM, let me make sure I was looking at the right day. I was not, but it's still 30 miles an hour that you have over there for Thursday. This NEM model is at about 25 miles an hour. So if we're going to split the difference, this NEM model looks like a little bit of a combination of the first two that we looked at. These sort of conditions are something that we can't ignore. It is going to make the course play a little bit harder. And if you take a look at the scoring averages from 2024, what you'll see is that the easiest round last year played nearly 6.5 strokes under par. The hardest round that you had last year played over 4 strokes harder. So it was about 2.25 under par, I believe, if memory serves me correctly. Either way, though, a big difference between the scoring just day to day out here. And I believe that hardest round, by the way, was on Saturday. The easiest round was one day later over there on Sunday. So it wasn't like the golf course had like firmed up or something like that. And that's why it played so much easier the next day. A little bit of wind, like we're going to be getting for tomorrow, has a pretty sizable impact on the scoring average. So rather than something like 4.5 under par, like we got for an average last year, which by the way, if I go to our averages, you can see that over here, played to a minus 4.64 average last year. I think we've got to adjust that a little bit. And what I'm going with for round one for a lot of my projections is about a -3 scoring average. So I've got it getting a little bit harder, but it is still going to be an extremely easy golf course. It's wide open. It's got drivable par fours. It's got reachable usual par fives across the board, and it's a par 73. So it's going to play easier because of that aspect too. So the birdie average also probably going to go down a little bit, probably going from about 6 per round, maybe down to about 5.5 out there per round. And the bogey average is where I think you might see a little bit of a bigger difference. That's probably going to go to at least 2 bogeys or worse per round. So those are the kind of conditions that I'm expecting out there for tomorrow. Fairway average, green regulation average probably also goes slightly down as well. But the fairway average, probably not all that much. Might go to like 8.5. 8.25 if it's a really blustery day. The green average, that one's a little bit harder to give you guys a barometer. I would say probably closer to like 13.5, maybe 14 greens of regulation per round. But that's a little bit tougher just because of like the pin locations. They could really tuck them, which might make it a little bit of a bigger impact. But if they're giving these guys soft pin locations on greens that are nearly 9,000 square foot on average, which is what we have around the Kapalua Plantation course, they're going to hit them even in 30-mile-an-hour winds if they give them some super soft pin locations. So yeah, I'd say somewhere between like 13.5 to 14 for an average for the field there. And what I also want to show you guys here is this bet the number page when it comes to the prop analysis. So this is something that they just added. And what you're going to see on here towards the bottom are the scoring for every single hole here. And this is over the last 5 years. And what you can do, which I really like about this, is you can sort it by round. So I'm actually just going to take last year and select it over here on the left. And I can show you that you can see the different scores per round at this event. So it's going to take a second to load here. And if you go to round 3, that was the quote unquote hard round last year. You'll see that these averages for birdies are significantly lower than what you had out here for round 4. So for example, let's look at hole number 2. Hole number 2 had about a 13.5% birdie rate over there on Sunday. For the second to last round, it was about half that at about 6.78%. So what that tells us is we can actually see the physical differences on those conditions and what it does to individual holes. And I know in Underdog Prize Picks, we don't have a lot of individual hole props to bet, but on sites like Hard Rock Bet, sites like Fanduel, Draftkings, they're always offering these single hole bets. We can get a good idea of not only just how conditions affect it, but we can also look at pin locations. So what we can do here is we can, select the last 5 years, for example, and we can look at the Sunday pin locations at this course. So I've got the last 5 years selected here, and now I only have the round 4 pins. And then we can see what the birdie or better percentage is only on round 4 at this event. And if we give it a big enough sample size, that's why I chose the last 5 years, it gives us a good idea of just round 4 in general, right? You're going to have some days that round 4 was easier than others, and some rounds where round 4 was harder than others, right? And we could do this for every single round, right? We can look at moving day at the Sentry Tournament of Champions. Just gives us an even better way to dial in some of these averages. And if you go ahead and look at round 1, which is going to be helpful out there for us, it looks like the first few holes have some tough pin locations, especially holes 1 and 2. They have some of the lower birdie or better percentages that we have throughout any of the rounds, but holes like 3 and 4 have a higher birdie percentage than you see in some of the other rounds. There are just some really interesting insights that we can find from this kind of analysis. So this is going to be a huge piece of the channel going on this year. And what we're going to get to do with a lot of this single hole stuff is incorporate more of the traditional sports books. Look at some of the Hard Rock Bet stuff a little bit more. Look at those Fanduel, Draftkings props out there for single props. They give you guys just another way to go out there and generate an edge. So just like I said before, guys, code Gsluke, if you guys are signing up for Bet the Number, will give you access to this. This is one of the tools that they have behind their paywall. Something else I want to show you guys too, when it comes to the props that I really like, is that they added some prop-based research over here to this. So what you can see over here is you can see like how many birdies are better they made at any given event, pars, bogeys or worse, fairways, greens regulation, all of that sort of jazz, just to give you guys an even better gauge of how these guys are doing on their prop bets. So just shout out there to Bet the Number and what they're doing. And now let's talk about some exposure over here for round number 1. So let me bring up Prize Picks. I have to bring it up before I can share my screen for you guys. And I've got one slip that I've already entered for tomorrow. So we'll go through that together. I don't think there's been any bumps. If there have, we'll find something else. We'll add another slip to the case. So here's Prize Picks. Here's Underdog. I don't think the 2 props that I took are available on Underdog. If they are, we can take them there too. But I took them on Prize Picks earlier, so I know they're there for sure. All right, we'll let that load. Let's go ahead and find these for you. So it was an under on Xander Schauffele strokes, and it was an over on Christian Bezainhout strokes. And luckily, neither one has bumped to this point, which It's kind of surprising given that both are pretty solid values, but hey, we'll take it, right? It makes our lives a little bit easier here. And I also have them, I guess Underdog's not going to load for us, but I do have the odds up over here on DraftKings as well. And what I'm going to show you guys is why I like these two props. So if we go over here to DraftKings, take a look at what they have for odds. What you'll see here with Xander Schauffele is that he's minus 150 for his under at that sort of line. So you can see him here, right? 67.5 strokes. That's the same line that we have over there on Prize Picks. He's minus 150 towards the under. And usually the good rule of thumb is if we can get like minus 135 to minus 140 odds, that's a pretty good lean, plus EV lean over there on a given prop. Minus 150 to minus 160 is where you're really starting to find a plus EV lean. So that one makes a lot of sense if you're taking a look at that aspect. But Xander Schauffele, if you guys were watching the fantasy section, you know he's one of my favorite plays this week. He's won at this event before. He has the best form of anyone in the field. It is frankly just the best player that we have in this kind of field. So if there's anyone that I'm going to support to shoot -6 at this kind of course, which by the way, to shoot 67, he has to shoot a -6 round to cover, which at no other course would we be doing, right? If it was a -6 line at any other course, you're hammering the over. Like it's a no-brainer at pretty much any other venue. But because the scoring average is going to be -3, maybe even -3.5, 4, that's why I'm taking that under on Xander Schauffele. Then the other prop we took, we don't have a line to compare to. So these books, they didn't give us a line on like every single player in the field, but Billy Horschel is, I would say, a better player than Christian Bezuidenhout. And you can see over here at 68.5 strokes, he's -160 for his over. So it's not like we have the direct line for comparison, but Bezuidenhout, he hasn't been his best self lately. He's been losing off the tee his last 5-6 events on tour. That includes events on the DP World Tour that were lower quality fields. And he's also struggling with his approach play. He had his last time out, I believe he lost nearly 2 strokes approach per round. And that was on a DP World Tour field that, again, is a much lower talent level than what you're going to have over here. So if our scoring average, if I think it's going to be -3, maybe a -4 scoring average, a -3 scoring average would be about 70 strokes on the par 70, even a -4, which by the way, I think is about as easy as it's going to get tomorrow. A -4 scoring average would be 69 strokes on this par 73. So even an average round, which by the way, for Bezuidenhout, him having an average day would be a pretty good day for him with the kind of form that he's been in, would be over the 68.5 line. So that's kind of the idea there. I think that's why Billy Horschel is also juiced towards the over, is he got these windy conditions in play out there for round number 1. So that pays 3x if you take it over there on Prize Picks. The reason I wanted to see if it was over here on Underdog was because if you take an over and an under, you would get a slight payout boost. But yeah, Xander's at 67 strokes there, so that was already bumped by 0.5. And I don't think they had a CBEZ lineup anyway. So I don't think that was, they don't even have a CBEZ line posted in terms of his strokes. So yeah, that'll be a Prize Picks only slip out there for our first round. I also want to bring up some Pick 6 stuff. I haven't looked at Pick 6 for a while, but I've heard rumblings that they're improving their product. So let's see it. Let's take a gander. I haven't looked at it at all this week, so this will be a true first look when it comes to this board. But let's see what they're cooking with over here for the first round. I don't know if I talked about Clark or Cantlay, but thoughts on them? Without giving away too much, Antonio, I really like both players. Clark's one of my core plays, so you know what I'm doing with him, right? I play my core plays. And Cantlay, I guess I'll just spill the beans. I'm playing him out there in lineups too. So I like the slightly lower ownership. I like the birdie or better upside. I like the driving ability of both of those players. And it's not like they're low owned. They're 17.5%, but they're low enough owned to give you some slight leverage. And you said thoughts on Burns as well. You're asking about all the guys I really like, Antonio. Long off the tee, good Bermuda grass putter, has been on fire lately. I love it. And the ownership's a little bit higher on Burns. So unlike those top two that are a little bit lower owned, he's, I think, average ownership compared to the guys around him. He's not mega chalky, though. So he definitely fits that kind of build for me. And yeah, all of those guys will be in some of my lineups. But let's see what we got over here. So 67.5, you could play for Xander over here on the Pick 6 side. And then they have a lot of guys at 68.5. Okay. Let's look at birdies better. So 6.5 for your top players. And then they have a bunch of guys at 5.5 birdies. And we didn't get a bunch of guys posted at 5.5 birdies on Prize Picks. Just to give you guys an idea of that, there was only one guy they posted at 5.5 birdies. So kind of a shame that we didn't have a bigger selection over there. But Pick 6 does give us a much larger selection. And one thing I'll say is that Echeverria makes a shit ton of birdies, like a metric fuck ton of birdies. I like that one a whole lot. Like there are a few others I'd probably lean on the over on too. Like a Johnny Vegas, a Cam Davis, I'd probably lean on the over. But Echeverria over at 5.5, that's my favorite out of those birdie lines. And then you guys know I like the Xander Schauffele prop there as well. I don't like these fantasy props. I'll probably stay away from that. Let's see what we have for bogeys or worse. They've got a few guys at 1.5. And it is a few lower tier players. Worth noting, by the way, Adam Scott is not a good bogey avoider at all when it comes to the PGA Tour. In fact, just to give you guys an exact number on his stats from last year, I believe he ranked outside the top 100 when it came to avoiding bogeys. So let me share my screen for you guys so you guys can see what we're working with. But yeah, if he's outside the top 150, that could be an over that we take at 1.5 bogeys. So here's the bogey avoidance stuff. Let's put in Scott's. Oh, number 67. So he must have improved towards the very end of the year in some of those fall series events. But yeah, still, even at number 67, I mean, there's only 60 players in this field, and it's some of the best players in the world. You'd still be leaning on his over a bit. But let's see what else we had for a line. So it was Wyndham Clark and Horschel. So I know Horschel's probably in that same range. Horschel's 31, a little bit better. Clark cannot avoid bogeys for his life. So yeah, he's number 87. I like Clark this week. I think he's going to make a lot of birdies this week. I think he's a good fantasy play. But the over on bogeys is damn tempting with how much he misses off the tee. So yeah, maybe something like that for a 3-leg slip. I'd say my favorite two would be those top two if you just wanted to do a 2-man. What would be the payout on that? What's a 2-man pay? 2x or more? So if you entered it for $10, what would it even pay? $20 or would it pay $30? Is I guess my question. Because I can't even play pick 6 here in Florida. Let's see. Oh. Never mind. I guess we won't see. So let me see if there's any last second questions. If not, guys, I think we're done. All good? Yeah. You're spilling the beans on all the guys I like, Antonio, but that's all good. Hey, we're on the same page. I like it. Is Decky too risky to play or bet on? He's won in Hawaii before. I like Decky. I think he's a decent course fit here. I like the ownership number as well, but there's always a lot of risk in playing Hideki Matsuyama. What I always say about playing Hideki is that if you're going to use him in lineups, just mentally prepare yourself for the withdraw notification in the morning. But yeah, I think he's a good fit. He's won at Sony before, so the event after this, but maybe there's something in that Hawaii air. And he said, you think the 3 picks is 4x? So the payouts suck on pick 6, huh? That's the issue then, huh? So like if we took this over, right, it only pays you 4x or something like that. Or so you're saying this 3x over here doesn't include your entry fee, right? So like unlike Prize Picks where it says 3x, you're actually getting your money back only with 2x. I don't know. I have to look into that a little bit. But yeah, if the payout is only 3x for a 3-man, that is shady to say the least. That would not be the best payout system, but that's all I've got over here for the live stream this week, guys. Best of luck over there with all of your exposure. Smash the like button if you guys haven't already. Also subscribe to the channel so you guys don't miss any of the content to come. That will of course include our showdown breakdowns throughout the rest of the weekend. Also our prop breakdowns, which will be on this channel over the weekend as well. For those showdown breakdowns, those will be on the Ship It Nation YouTube channel. On my X/Twitter, I'll be giving you guys all the details on that, but make sure you subscribe to the Ship It Nation channel so you guys don't miss any of those when I'm going live, as well as all the content afterwards on my channel. It's going to be a lot this year, but we're trying to make it more focused, right? Like the showdown show is going to be going over all the showdown stuff for any given round. So the people that are there for the showdown could just watch that show and get what they're looking for. And then all the prop stuff is just going to be on the prop show. So I know it sounds more complicated, but the goal is actually to make it easier as, you know, viewers to get what you're looking for. So hopefully it works out. I think it's going to be a good thing here for 2025, but happy new year to everyone out there. Best of luck out there for this week. And let's start off this year with a bang.